October 24, 1944. The Formosa Strait. A moonless sky swallows the horizon. The sea is black glass, broken only by faint wakes of ships pushing north. A Japanese convoy, 19 vessels strong, laden with men, oil, and steel. Somewhere beneath them, silence moves. Inside the USS Tang, the air hums with electricity and fear. Red lights cast ghostly shadows across sweating faces. Commander Richard O'Kane leans over the periscope, his voice low, deliberate. Convoy bearing 090, range 2,000 yards. The crew barely breathe. The boat glides like a predator, its motors whispering through the depths. The men know what's at stake. One mistake, and the ocean becomes their grave. Through the periscope lens, O'Kane watches the silhouettes pass. A tanker, a freighter, another behind it. Perfect spacing, perfect timing. He gives the order. Fire one! A muffled thud, a shiver through the hull. The torpedo streaks into the dark. 30 seconds later, the night erupts. The sea ignites with flame, and within moments, hell itself breaks the surface. The flames over the Formosa Strait were not the beginning. They were the end of a long, calculated campaign beneath the Pacific waves. By the autumn of 1944, the Pacific Ocean had become a vast and merciless battlefield. Japan's empire, once stretching from the jungles of Burma to the islands of the Solomons, was bleeding from 1,000 wounds. Its fleets had been shattered, its air wings decimated, and its armies stranded across far-flung outposts. Yet the arteries that still kept Japan alive were the shipping lanes, convoys of oil tankers, troop transports, and freighters carrying food, fuel, and ammunition from the territories that remained. To the men of the U.S. Navy's silent service, those convoys were lifelines waiting to be severed. By 1944, the American submarine campaign had matured into one of the most devastating maritime offensives in modern history. What had begun as a hesitant, error-prone effort in 1942, hampered by faulty torpedoes and rigid doctrine, had evolved into a calculated hunt. New radar systems, electric torpedoes, and aggressive commanders turned U.S. submarines into predators capable of crippling Japan's economy. From their bases at Fremantle, Midway, and Pearl Harbor, sleek gray boats slipped into the Pacific, each carrying fewer than 90 men. They fought alone, unseen, and with little hope of rescue if discovered. Yet by 1944, these submarines were responsible for sinking more than half of all Japanese merchant shipping lost during the war. The Japanese called them the Sea Devils. Among the most feared was USS Tang, SS-306, a Balao-class submarine under the command of Commander Richard H. O'Kane. O'Kane was no stranger to danger. Before commanding Tang, he had served as executive officer aboard the famed USS Wahoo under Mush Morton, a bold leader who transformed submarine warfare. O'Kane absorbed every lesson. Attack from close range, strike fast, never retreat. When Wahoo was lost in 1943, O'Kane carried her spirit forward. Tang's first 4 patrols were near perfect. In less than a year, she had sunk 17 ships totaling over 93,000 tons, often by daring nighttime surface attacks. She stalked convoys as if guided by instinct, striking with precision, vanishing before the enemy could react. The crew idolized O'Kane's calm confidence, his unspoken promise that he would bring them home. But the Pacific was changing. The Japanese merchant fleet, once numbering over 6 million tons, had been reduced to less than half that by mid-1944. Every ship mattered now. Japan's refineries were dry, its steel mills starved. Each freighter destroyed meant another battalion without ammunition, another city without rice, another aircraft grounded for lack of fuel. Desperation bred adaptation. The Imperial Navy organized what convoys it could still muster, armed with small escorts, shallow-set depth charges, and crews trained to listen for the faint whine of an approaching torpedo. Yet these measures were too little, too late. When Tang departed from Pearl Harbor on September 24, 1944, she carried 24 torpedoes and a reputation as the deadliest submarine in the Pacific. Her mission, patrol the Formosa Strait, where Japan's convoys still crept between the Philippines and China. Intelligence reported heavy shipping activity, targets rich but well guarded. As Tang crossed the Pacific, O'Kane knew this patrol might be different. The war was accelerating toward its climax. American forces were advancing toward the Philippines, preparing for the liberation of Leyte. Every Japanese ship sunk in those narrow waters would weaken the enemy's ability to resist. By October 23rd, Tang had already struck multiple targets, sending tankers and transports to the bottom with ruthless efficiency. But it was the following night, October 24th, when she encountered a convoy that would etch her name into naval legend. 19 ships, a column stretching miles across the dark sea. Japanese tankers carrying precious oil to the home islands, guarded by heavily armed escorts. Through the static hum of Tang's radar, faint blips began to appear. The men crowded around the scope, eyes fixed on the glowing screen. Each blip was a potential kill, or a potential death. O'Kane's hand rested on the chart table, calm, methodical, unshaken. "We've got them," he said quietly. The hunt was about to begin. The calm before the strike had taken years to shape. Years of evolution in how submarines hunted, how convoys defended, and how technology turned the tides of war. The Formosa Strait was one of the most dangerous stretches of water in the Pacific. Narrow, shallow, and teeming with patrol craft, it was both a highway and a trap. Every Japanese convoy that sailed through risked destruction from the shadows below. Yet for Japan, it was indispensable, a vital artery feeding the empire's last remaining territories in China. By late 1944, the Imperial Japanese Navy's once proud merchant protection system was collapsing. The Kaibokan, small escort frigates hastily built for anti-submarine defense, lacked radar and modern sonar. Their depth charges were crude, often exploding too shallow to reach a diving submarine. Crews were young, inexperienced, and terrified of the unseen enemy beneath them. For all their discipline, the Japanese escorts were blind in the dark. American radar had become the great equalizer. The SJ radar system aboard the USS Tang could detect ships miles away, painting glowing arcs of light across the black screen long before a convoy ever saw her. For O'Kane, it was a hunter's gift. Eyes in the night. He preferred to attack on the surface, using speed and stealth rather than deep dives. Under cover of darkness, the submarine was nearly invisible, her silhouette blending with the waves. That night, as Tang approached the convoy, the conditions were perfect. The sea was calm, the sky starless, visibility was poor, ideal for a surprise strike. The convoy moved in a rigid line, each vessel trusting the one ahead to guide its course. Somewhere among them were tankers carrying oil from the Dutch East Indies, freighters loaded with military supplies, and hundreds of Japanese soldiers being ferried to reinforce defenses in the Philippines. Tang tracked them silently, running parallel for hours, closing the gap inch by inch. Inside the submarine, every man was awake. No one smoked. No one spoke above a whisper. The air was thick with diesel fumes and anticipation. O'Kane studied the enemy through the periscope. He was patient, always waiting for the perfect moment. Years earlier, aboard the Wahoo, he had seen how haste could betray a submarine's position. Tonight he moved with surgical precision. By midnight, Tang was in ideal firing position. She had slipped between the convoy's columns, an impossible maneuver that only O'Kane would dare attempt. Ahead of her loomed two massive tankers side by side. Behind them, a line of freighters stretched into the darkness. At 1:30 a.m., the order came. Fire one. The Torpedo raced away, followed by another. The crew held their breath as they counted down the seconds. Then, a thunderous explosion ripped through the night. Flames burst skyward, turning the sea orange. The first tanker disintegrated in seconds. The second was hit moments later. Within minutes, chaos spread across the convoy. Ships veered wildly, colliding in confusion. Japanese escorts fired blindly into the darkness, their guns tracing arcs of red across the sea. But Tang was gone. Diving deep, silent, moving beneath the wreckage she had created. For O'Kane and his crew, success was measured in silence. the brief calm between explosions, the knowledge that their attack had crippled the enemy's lifeline. In those moments, they were not heroes or monsters. They were instruments of a brutal, necessary logic. As dawn approached, Tang surfaced again. The radar screen was alive with echoes, burning wrecks, drifting hulls, desperate transmissions in Japanese Morse. O'Kane studied them one by one. He had 10 torpedoes left. The convoy was in disarray. It was time to finish the job. By morning, the ocean was littered with debris and oil slicks stretching for miles. Dozens of lifeboats floated among the flames. Survivors clung to wreckage, stunned by how fast it had happened. For them, the attack had lasted only minutes. For Tang, it was the culmination of a doctrine perfected over years. But the sea is never merciful. Every hunter risks becoming prey. As O'Kane prepared his next assault on the remnants of the convoy, one question lingered unspoken among the crew. How many more times could they cheat the odds? The Pacific had devoured hundreds of submariners. Every torpedo fired carried not only death for the enemy, but a fraction of that same danger reflected back. And in the hours ahead, that danger would return, in the most tragic, ironic way imaginable. The night's chaos was only the prelude. What followed would become one of the most dramatic and catastrophic moments in submarine warfare. The human angle. Beneath the steel skin inside the USS Tang, there was no day or night, only the rhythm of the hunt. The air was heavy with oil and metal, stale after weeks at sea. 87 men lived in a narrow steel tube no longer than a baseball field, where privacy ended at the shoulder of the man next to you. Every sound mattered. The clang of a dropped wrench could betray them to an enemy destroyer above. Submariners were a rare breed. Volunteers who accepted claustrophobia, heat, and silence as their companions. Many came from small towns across America, carrying photographs of wives or sweethearts tucked above their bunks. To them, the war was reduced to sounds. The click of sonar, the hiss of compressed air, the muffled roar of explosions somewhere far away. Commander Richard O'Kane moved among them with quiet authority. He rarely raised his voice. He didn't have to. His presence carried weight, not because of rank, but because the crew trusted him absolutely. They had seen him bring them through impossible odds, striking convoys point blank and surfacing beneath enemy searchlights. He believed in precision and in people. A commander who calculated risk like a mathematician and bore its burden like a priest. The men of Tang weren't bloodthirsty. They didn't celebrate when ships exploded. They watched the orange glow through the periscope, knowing that every vessel sinking meant hundreds of lives ending. Yet they also knew each freighter destroyed brought the war closer to its end. Between duty and conscience, they walked a razor's edge. The technological angle, the tools of the hunter by late 1944, American submarines had become floating laboratories of innovation. The USS Tang carried two weapons that symbolized this: evolution, the SJ radar, and the Mark 18 electric torpedo. The radar was a miracle of the age, pulsing energy into the dark and painting the sea with invisible light. For the first time, a submarine could see beyond the horizon. Tang could detect a convoy at more than 10 miles, plot its course, and strike before ever being spotted. To the Japanese, who relied mostly on visual watch and primitive sonar, it was an unseen menace. The torpedo, too, had changed. Early in the war, American submariners had cursed their Mark 14 torpedoes. Unreliable, running too deep, or detonating prematurely. Many attacks in 1942 had failed because of technical faults rather than tactical errors. But by 1944, the Mark 18 had arrived. A German-inspired electric torpedo with no visible wake, silent and deadly. Still, technology was never perfect. The Mark 18's guidance systems were temperamental, and a single mechanical flaw could send a torpedo veering back toward the boat that fired it. O'Kane knew this, but in the Pacific War, hesitation killed. He trusted his machines because he had to. Tang also carried radar detectors, sonar hydrophones, and newly designed periscopes with optical precision unmatched in earlier submarines. Each system was the product of relentless innovation. The Navy's recognition that victory beneath the sea depended as much on science as on courage. Yet technology alone didn't win battles. It was how O'Kane used it. His ability to weave radar, timing, and instinct into one seamless act of predation that made Tang deadly. His philosophy was simple: attack fast, from close range, and never fire more than necessary. It was the same doctrine he'd learned from Wahoo's Captain Mush Morton, but refined with mathematical exactitude. The leadership angle, Richard O'Kane's calculated courage. O'Kane was not a gambler. He was a strategist who used daring as a tool, not a thrill. He often said, "A submarine's best weapon is the man who knows when to shoot." His leadership blended discipline and empathy. Before each patrol, he memorized every man's name, their families, their quirks. During battle, he delegated authority like a conductor leading an orchestra. Calm, rhythmic, precise. When Tang entered combat, the control room became a symphony of controlled chaos. Orders were short, clipped, emotionless. The helmsman called out bearings. The torpedoman loaded tubes with lightning speed. O'Kane listened, absorbing every sound, every report, piecing together a picture of the battle in his mind. He had a rule: never dive too soon. Most submarine commanders avoided surface attacks, fearing detection. O'Kane did the opposite. He believed that darkness was the best armor. On the surface, Tang could run faster, strike closer, and escape before the enemy realized where the attack came from. That night in the Formosa Strait, his tactics were textbook O'Kane: approach from ahead, slip into the convoy's path, and strike multiple targets in one run. His confidence wasn't arrogance, it was born from study and repetition. Many of his peers admired him. Others thought him reckless, but to his crew, he was the embodiment of precision under pressure. A man who demanded everything but gave everything in return. Transition, above them, the enemy was unaware that their entire convoy had just been placed in the crosshairs of a man who viewed the ocean as a chessboard and each ship as a moving piece, in a game he'd already mastered. What O'Kane didn't know, what no one aboard Tang could have foreseen, was how fate would soon twist that mastery into tragedy. The enemy's perspective. Blind guardians of the convoy for the Japanese. Escorts guarding the convoy that October night, the ocean was a whispering void. They knew the enemy was out there, invisible, merciless, but they could not see him. Their sonar sets, crude and unreliable, often mistook breaking waves for submarines. Their radar, when it worked at all, could barely distinguish a ship from the horizon's static. To the crews aboard those small frigates and destroyers, the convoy was both a duty and a death sentence. They had watched other ships vanish in sudden bursts of flame, heard the screams of men burning in oil-slicked water. Yet they still sailed, obedient, disciplined, trapped by loyalty and code. The Imperial Japanese Navy had been built for grand battles, dreadnoughts, carriers, duels of steel under the rising sun. Anti-submarine warfare was beneath its honor, delegated to hastily trained reservists. The doctrine relied on courage, not science. "Listen for the enemy," officers told their crews, as if bravery could hear what machines could not. That night, when Tang's torpedoes struck, panic spread faster than the flames. Ships scattered, their formations breaking apart. Captains shouted contradictory orders over the radio, convinced they were under attack by multiple submarines. Depth charges rained blindly, detonating where Tang had been hours earlier. The Japanese officers, trained to fight visible foes, faced an enemy that existed only in echoes. For them, the destruction came like a phantom. Sudden, inexplicable, unstoppable. The moral angle. The weight of victory beneath the sea was never clean. Every submarine commander knew that the torpedoes they fired did not distinguish between soldier and sailor, between cargo and life. In the Pacific, the line between military and civilian blurred. Merchant ships carried troops and fuel. Fishing boats reported submarine sightings. Hospital ships were sometimes armed. To the men of the Tang, war was a duty defined by survival. Yet when the periscope lens filled with burning ships and human shapes thrashing in the water, conscience stirred. O'Kane once wrote that he felt the heavy price of victory every time a target disappeared beneath the waves. He did not romanticize war. He saw it as a necessity, one that demanded both precision and restraint. But morality in submarine warfare was a fragile concept. Once submerged, there was no rescue, no surrender, no second chance. The ocean offered only two outcomes: hunter or hunted. Historians would later describe the U.S. submarine campaign as one of the most effective and devastating blockades in history. By the end of 1944, Japan's merchant fleet had been reduced to less than a quarter of its original strength. Millions of tons of shipping destroyed, hundreds of thousands of lives lost. Yet even as Tang's torpedoes crippled Japan's ability to fight, they also underscored a grim truth: that progress in warfare often comes wrapped in tragedy. The same technology that made Tang invincible would, in mere hours, turn against her. The tactical angle, precision, timing, and instinct in the art of undersea warfare. Seconds mattered more than miles. O'Kane's tactics were built on geometry, angles, speed, and timing. He preferred to attack convoys from the front, not from behind. By intercepting their course, he could position Tang where the enemy's path crossed his torpedoes' arcs. It was mathematical, ruthless, and elegant. His approach that night was textbook perfection. Using radar bearings and stopwatch precision, Tang weaved between the convoy's columns, targeting the largest ships first. Each torpedo salvo was carefully spaced to ensure maximum confusion. He waited until the first explosions drew attention away before launching the next. Japanese escorts, unable to pinpoint his position, dropped depth charges randomly. O'Kane's training saved them. His instinct to dive just deep enough to evade, then rise again for another attack. In just 10 minutes, Tang had inflicted catastrophic losses: tankers ablaze, freighters breaking apart, and an entire convoy paralyzed in panic. The attack was so sudden that survivors later recalled thinking they were under air assault. But the success also bred danger. For O'Kane, the calculus was shifting. He had only a handful of torpedoes left. The convoy was crippled, yet part of him wanted to ensure no ship escaped. That instinct, the desire to finish the job completely, would soon bring Tang within range of her own destruction. Transition. The edge of triumph in. The silence that followed the attack. Tang's crew watched through the periscope as the convoy burned. The sea glowed with oil fires stretching to the horizon, and somewhere in that inferno, Japanese officers stared into the darkness, unable to comprehend how one submarine could cause such devastation. In less than 20 minutes, Tang had sunk or fatally crippled more ships than entire wolf packs had in a month. It was a masterclass in modern naval warfare. Swift, clinical, and devastating. But beneath the triumph was an unspoken dread. The ocean has a way of restoring balance. O'Kane, methodical as ever, prepared to fire his final torpedoes. The last of Tang's deadly arsenal was loaded, one weapon that would soon decide the fate of everyone aboard. The next moment would turn victory into tragedy, and legend into warning. Formosa Strait, 3:00 a.m., October 25, 1944. The sea burned like a city on fire. Oil floated thick on the waves, igniting in patches of orange and white. Explosions still rolled across the horizon, delayed detonations from ships already lost. Through the periscope, Commander Richard O'Kane watched the glow fade, one ship after another sinking beneath the black water. For most submariners, this would have been enough. 19 ships attacked, 5 confirmed destroyed, several more crippled. But O'Kane was not most commanders. His mission was not merely to harass the enemy. It was to annihilate their capacity to move. And as long as a single ship still floated, he considered his work unfinished. The radar screen flickered. A final blip, a straggler, a transport moving slowly, damaged but afloat. O'Kane's eyes narrowed. "We'll finish her," he said quietly. Tang's engines hummed back to life. The submarine turned toward the last target, cutting across a field of drifting wreckage. The smell of burning fuel seeped through the air vents. The sea was dotted with bodies and lifeboats, survivors illuminated by the fires of their own convoy. The crew worked in silence. They knew this was dangerous. The area was shallow, the enemy alert. Yet O'Kane's calm was absolute. He had been here before, dozens of times, and always come back unscathed. At 3:05 a.m., Tang surfaced. The submarine glided through the haze, her deck gun ready but silent. O'Kane ordered 2 torpedoes prepared. The range was short, barely 800 yards. He wanted precision, not spectacle. The first torpedo fired clean. The crew waited, counting seconds. 12, 13, 14. A deep explosion rumbled through the hull. The target was hit, the transport breaking apart in flames. A few cheers echoed through the control room. Subdued, respectful. Target destroyed, the sonar operator reported. O'Kane exhaled slowly. 1 torpedo remained in the tubes, Tang's 24th and last. He hesitated. "We'll fire 1 more," he said. "Make sure she's finished." The torpedoman loaded the final round, a Mark 18 electric torpedo, serial number unknown. It was the same type that had brought Tang so much success. Silent, reliable, invisible. But O'Kane knew its risks. Electric torpedoes lacked the clear wake of their predecessors. If they malfunctioned, there was no warning. Still, he trusted the weapon. The sea had always answered his precision with reward. At 3:10 a.m., he gave the command, "Fire 10." The last torpedo left the tube with a muffled hiss. The men resumed their countdown. O'Kane leaned over the periscope, watching the faint shape of the burning ship ahead. 20 seconds. 30. 40. Nothing. No explosion. No sound. Then, from sonar, a faint, high-pitched ping. The operator frowned. "Sir," returning echo. "It's—" Before he could finish, a blinding flash tore through the control room. A shockwave slammed the submarine. Lights flickered, gauges shattered. Men were thrown from their stations. The torpedo, Tang's final shot, had malfunctioned, curved sharply and circled back. It had struck her own stern, detonating directly under the aft torpedo room. The explosion ripped Tang apart. Compartments flooded instantly. The stern vanished in a roar of steam and pressure. The submarine pitched violently, plunging downward at a terrifying angle. O'Kane was hurled against the periscope stand. Water burst through the shattered bulkheads. Men screamed in the dark, some crushed by falling steel. Others swept into the rising flood. Within seconds, the control room filled with water. O'Kane shouted for the order to surface. Instinctively, desperately. The ballast tanks blew, forcing compressed air through ruptured valves. Tang lurched upward, her ruined hull groaning under the strain. She broke the surface briefly, half submerged, smoke pouring from her hatches. Flames danced across the water, reflecting the inferno she had created moments earlier. Only a handful of men made it to the deck, some already wounded, others in shock. The sea hissed with steam and oil. O'Kane was among them, thrown clear by the blast. As he struggled to stay afloat, he saw Tang's bow rise once, as if gasping for air, before slipping beneath the waves. The silence that followed was absolute. O'Kane found himself surrounded by wreckage, and by the very enemy he had destroyed hours before. Dozens of Japanese survivors clung to the same debris, staring in disbelief at the sight of the American submarine that had annihilated their convoy, now sinking beside them. For a moment, there was no war. Only men adrift in an ocean of oil and fire, watching their machines vanish beneath the waves. Above them, dawn was beginning to break. The flames dimmed as the horizon turned pale. What had begun as one of the most brilliant attacks in submarine history had ended in tragedy. A hunter consumed by his own weapon. But the story of Tang did not end there. Survivors, both American and Japanese, would soon be pulled from the sea, bearing witness to one of the most haunting ironies of naval warfare. Morning came to the Formosa Strait in a haze of smoke and silence. The sea was slick with oil, shimmering in a sickly rainbow. The air stank of fuel and fire. Among the debris, The few survivors clung to anything that floated: planks, barrels, shattered lifeboats. When the Japanese escort ship Takemaru arrived on the scene, the sailors could hardly believe what they saw. Hours earlier, this stretch of water had been filled with 19 ships. Now the ocean was a graveyard. Burning hulks still smoldered on the horizon. Hundreds of men, their comrades, were gone, and in the middle of it all drifted a few stunned figures wearing American life vests. The Takemaru's captain ordered searchlights lowered. In the pale dawn, his men dragged survivors aboard, Japanese and American alike. For the first time, they laid eyes on the enemy who had annihilated their convoy. Commander Richard O'Kane, bruised and oil-streaked, was pulled from the water. His uniform was gone, shredded by the explosion. He was silent as they bound his wrists. Around him floated wreckage marked USS Tang. The Japanese sailors, many still dazed by their own losses, stared at him as if at a ghost. To them, this man represented the invisible terror that had haunted the Pacific for years. Now he was just another prisoner, soaked, shivering, mortal. One officer, upon learning who he was, reportedly muttered, This is the submarine that destroyed us." O'Kane said nothing. His thoughts were with the 87 men of Tang, most of whom were gone. Only 9 had survived the explosion. 5 would be rescued by the Japanese. The rest sank with their ship, trapped in darkness, the impossible escape below the surface. 29 men had been sealed in the forward compartments of Tang, which had come to rest upright on the seabed, roughly 180 feet down. The survivors there faced an unthinkable decision: attempt escape through the flooded escape trunk or die of suffocation. Hours passed in the dark. Air pressure built. Some prayed. Others worked silently to ready the escape gear. Using the Momsen lung, a primitive rebreathing device, 5 men attempted the perilous ascent. One by one, they pushed through the escape hatch, fighting against the crushing water. Only a few made it. Most were lost on the way up, blacking out from pressure or drowning in the oily sea. Those who reached the surface were scattered among the debris, clinging to wreckage, barely conscious. They would be found later by the Japanese, the same enemy they had been sent to destroy: Captivity and Revelation. The surviving Americans were taken aboard Japanese ships and brought to Formosa, now Taiwan. From there, they were sent to a prison camp. The conditions were brutal: starvation, beatings, disease. Yet O'Kane maintained the same composure that had defined his command. In captivity, he learned what his submarine had accomplished. Japanese officers, in disbelief, showed him their own naval reports. Tang had sunk or crippled 5 ships in under 10 minutes, annihilating an entire convoy almost single-handedly. It was one of the most destructive submarine actions in naval history. But what astonished the Japanese most wasn't the number of ships lost. It was how swiftly it happened. In their naval academies, it would later be studied as an example of perfect attack coordination and of the unpredictable danger of new weaponry. The irony was unbearable. Tang had fallen not to enemy action, but to her own technological marvel. A commander's silence. In the prison camp, O'Kane rarely spoke of the final battle. When asked by Japanese interrogators how he felt about sinking so many ships, he simply replied, "I did my duty, as your men did theirs." He carried the guilt of survival quietly. Every man who surfaced alive owed his life to training, and to O'Kane's insistence on preparation for the worst. Before the patrol, he had drilled his men in emergency escape procedures, though none had imagined they would ever need them. When the war ended in August 1945, O'Kane and the surviving crew were liberated by Allied forces. Emaciated, exhausted, and haunted, they returned to a navy that hailed them as heroes. O'Kane would later receive the Medal of Honor, not for surviving, but for the ferocity and precision of Tang's final battle. His citation described extraordinary heroism and gallantry in action, a calm acknowledgement of a man who had destroyed an enemy convoy against impossible odds. Yet, he often said the medal was not his alone. "It belongs," he wrote, "to the men who did not return." Transition, the echo of the deep. The sea keeps its secrets, but the story of Tang spread quickly through both navies. Among the Japanese officers, disbelief turned to respect. They had seen bravery before, but never destruction delivered with such precision by a single submarine in a matter of minutes. Among the Americans, Tang became legend, both a triumph and a tragedy. O'Kane's name joined the pantheon of the Navy's most revered commanders. Yet the loss of his crew would remain the defining weight of his life. The Formosa Strait eventually calmed. The flames faded. But beneath that quiet surface lay the twisted remains of Tang, a silent monument to courage, innovation, and the razor-thin margin between victory and doom. The Pacific War was nearing its final act. Tang's loss was both a warning and a symbol that even at the height of mastery, war had its own laws of balance. For every triumph, a reckoning awaited. The loss of the USS Tang reverberated across the Pacific like a shockwave. When the submarine failed to report back to base at the end of her 5th patrol, the Navy listed her as overdue and presumed lost. For weeks, no one knew what had happened. Not her crew's families, not her fellow submariners. Tang had simply vanished. It wasn't until months later, after Japan's surrender in 1945, that the truth emerged. Not from American intelligence, but from the mouths of survivors liberated from Japanese prison camps. Their story stunned even seasoned officers at Pearl Harbor. The tale they told defied belief. One submarine operating alone had destroyed an entire convoy in less than 10 minutes, only to be sunk by her own torpedo minutes later. To the Navy's historians, it was both a tragedy and a marvel, a case study in precision warfare, mechanical failure, and the perilous edge between mastery and misfortune. Shock in Tokyo, the enemy's realization. In Tokyo, the news of Tang's rampage spread quietly among naval officers. The Japanese had long feared the American submarines, but Tang's final attack was something different. Something almost supernatural in its efficiency. According to surviving Japanese convoy reports, the attack was over before most ships could respond. Some believed multiple submarines were involved. Others theorized an aerial torpedo strike. Only later did they confirm it had been a single vessel, the same one whose commander now sat in a Formosa prison camp. When interrogations began, the Japanese officers could scarcely hide their disbelief. They showed O'Kane the damage reports: tankers split in two, escorts disabled, soldiers lost by the hundreds. The scale of destruction inflicted by one submarine forced them to confront what they had long denied, that Japan's convoy system was collapsing. In the words of one officer recorded after the war, "We had believed our losses exaggerated. The Tang proved they were not." Recognition in Pearl Harbor. The hero who returned. Alone when O'Kane finally returned home, he was met not with celebration, but with solemn respect. He had achieved what few men could: 5 patrols, 33 ships sunk, more than 100,000 tons of enemy shipping destroyed. Yet he had also brought home the unbearable memory of losing his boat and his men. On March 27, 1946, Commander Richard H. O'Kane received the Medal of Honor from President Harry S. Truman. The citation praised his extraordinary heroism and his supreme devotion to duty in the face of grave danger. But O'Kane's eyes, witnesses said, were distant. He accepted the medal quietly, then spent most of the ceremony speaking not of valor, but of the men who remained beneath the Formosa Strait. Other decorations followed: the Navy Cross, Silver Star, and numerous battle citations. Yet O'Kane himself often deflected praise. "The medal belongs to Tang," he would say. "She earned it." His surviving crew members echoed the sentiment. To them, Tang was more than a submarine. She was a brotherhood forged under pressure, a machine that lived and died with them. Their bond endured long after the war ended, through reunions and shared silence. Echoes in the submarine force. Within the U.S. Navy's submarine community, the story of Tang became a cautionary legend. The details of her loss were studied in war colleges and engineering schools alike. The lesson was clear: Even the most advanced weapons could betray their masters. The Mark 18 torpedo, though revolutionary, had inherent flaws. After Tang's loss, engineers revisited its design, refining guidance systems and safety measures. Future models would never again carry the same risk of circular run. But the tragedy also underscored something deeper: the unpredictability of the sea itself. Technology could fail, radar could falter. Yet courage, discipline, and trust were constants. Tang's final patrol became a symbol of how innovation and human resolve could change the course of war, and how quickly fate could reclaim both. In the months following her disappearance, other submarines carried on Tang's mission. The silent service continued to strangle Japan's shipping routes, until by mid-1945, the island nation's industry had all but collapsed. But among the submarine crews, there was a sense that something irreplaceable had been lost with O'Kane's boat. The Tang's wreck, lying deep beneath the Formosa Strait, became both legend and warning. A silent reminder that in war, perfection often precedes catastrophe. The war was ending, but the legacy of the USS Tang was only beginning to surface. Her story would not fade with her commander's medals or her crew's memories. It would ripple through generations of submariners who would one day sail in her shadow. The sea that swallowed the USS Tang never gave her back. Her exact resting place remained a mystery for decades. A dark legend whispered through submarine schools and veterans' halls. Divers who searched the Formosa Strait after the war found little trace of her, only warped metal fragments deep in the silt. The Pacific, vast and indifferent, kept her secrets. For the men of the silent service, Tang's fate became a parable. The razor-thin line between domination and disaster. Every submarine captain who followed O'Kane studied her patrols, her radar tracking, her surface attacks, her lethal precision, but also her end. In the Navy's training rooms, instructors would point to Tang's final minutes as a lesson that no victory, however complete, erased the risks of overconfidence and mechanical fallibility. Yet the men who survived remembered her differently. To them, Tang was not a cautionary tale but a monument to daring, discipline, and faith in each other. O'Kane often wrote to the families of his lost crew, describing their courage in unflinching human terms. "They were the best men I have ever known," he once said. "They did their duty until the end, and because of them, our Navy learned to fight better, smarter, and with greater heart." Japan's recognition, the shock that changed doctrine. In post-war Japan, Tang's attack became a turning point in naval thought. Japanese officers studying captured American reports realized how far their anti-submarine tactics had fallen behind. Their reliance on visual scouting, limited sonar, and rigid formation discipline had left their convoys defenseless. Tang's ambush, swift, precise, and invisible, demonstrated the total dominance of modern technology combined with initiative. The Japanese Navy's post-war analyses, later declassified, described the Formosa Strait convoy action as an annihilation in minutes. One admiral, reflecting in 1946, admitted, "We did not understand radar. We believed courage could overcome machines. Tang proved courage alone was not enough." That acknowledgement marked a quiet, sobering moment in Japan's military history, an admission that bravery had met its limit against innovation. It reshaped post-war Japanese naval training for decades to come, emphasizing radar, sonar, and tactical flexibility, lessons born from defeat. A legacy beneath the waves by the 1950s. The story of Tang had entered naval folklore. Her name appeared in history books and officer training manuals alike. The Navy commissioned a new submarine in 1951, USS Tang, SS-563, a sleek, diesel-electric vessel that embodied everything learned from her predecessor's sacrifice. At her commissioning ceremony, veterans of the first Tang stood silently as the flag was raised. Some wept openly. O'Kane himself attended, his posture still rigid, his expression still unreadable. When asked how it felt to see Tang reborn, he replied simply, "It feels like she came home." The new Tang would go on to serve with Distinction throughout the Cold War. A living echo of the submarine that had once changed the course of undersea warfare. The weight of memory for Richard O'Kane. The war never truly ended. He continued to serve, later retiring as a rear admiral, but his heart remained with the men he lost. In his writings, he rarely spoke of triumph. Instead, he spoke of duty and debt to those who did not return. His 1977 memoir, Clear the Bridge, he remains one of the most vivid first-hand accounts of submarine combat ever written, both a tactical chronicle and a confession. He died in 1994 at the age of 83. At his funeral, the Navy honored him with full military rights. The submarine force's flag was draped over his coffin, and his Medal of Honor rested atop it, gleaming, heavy, and silent. O'Kane's ashes were later scattered at sea, over the same Pacific waters where Tang once roamed. Transition, the quiet after victory. By the end of the war, Japan's merchant fleet had been reduced to near extinction. The empire that once spanned oceans had been strangled by men like O'Kane and boats like Tang. Yet even in triumph, there was no celebration, only reflection. For those who survived beneath the waves, victory was measured not in ships sunk or medals earned, but in the faces remembered and the silence that followed each patrol. The ocean keeps no monuments, but it remembers everything. The flames of Formosa had long faded, but Tang's story, her rise, her strike, her fall and remained a testament to the paradox of modern war, that mastery over destruction can end in self-destruction. From that paradox would come new understanding, new doctrine, and, perhaps, a sliver of wise. The Pacific is quiet now. The tides that once carried fleets and fire have reclaimed their calm, as if nothing ever happened. But beneath the still water, the wreck of the USS Tang rests in eternal formation, her steel twisted, her story unbroken. The Tang's final patrol remains one of the most extraordinary and haunting moments in the history of naval warfare. It embodied the paradox of the Second World War, a conflict where courage met machine, and where the thin line between triumph and tragedy could vanish in a heartbeat. Commander Richard O'Kane's attack on that October night was more than a tactical masterpiece. It was the culmination of an entire evolution in undersea combat, a war fought without glory, without witnesses, and often without return. His calm precision, his crew's unwavering discipline, and their faith in technology transformed the ocean into a battlefield of intellect and instinct. Yet in the end, it was not the enemy that destroyed them, but their own creation. The weapon that symbolized human ingenuity turned back upon its maker. In that instant, Tang's fate spoke to something larger than war. The eternal truth that mastery over destruction does not free us from its reach. For the men who served beneath the waves, Tang's story became more than legend. It became a vow to remember the cost of perfection, to respect the power they wielded, and to never forget the silence that follows every victory. Today, when submariners train in simulators and nuclear vessels prowl unseen oceans, they still speak her name, not as myth, but as memory, of the boat that struck with the precision of a scalpel and paid for it with everything. The sea keeps her secret well. But if one listens long enough, in the hum of the engines, the echo of sonar, the distant roll of waves, one might still hear the whisper of steel beneath the depths, the voice of the Tang. Still hunting, still watching, forever part of the Pacific Dom for the generations who followed. If this story moved you, if the fate of the USS Tang reminded you of the courage, precision, and tragedy that defined the war beneath the waves, then help keep these histories alive. Subscribe to the channel for more true World War II stories told with cinematic realism. No fiction, no fantasy, just the raw truth of men, machines, and moments that changed the course of history. Leave a comment below. What do you think Tang's legacy teaches us about war, technology, and fate? And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss the next untold story from the deep. Because history doesn't fade. It waits quietly, beneath the surface, until someone remembers.